Well, we end our whole story, our whole trip through the early days of the reign of the kings, the first kings of Israel. We end that today. Today will be our last day here on Friday the 13th, but more importantly, it is Friday of the fifth week of Ordinary Time. We begin the sixth week next week, but as you know, it only lasts 3 days, and then we go into Lent. And we also end up, for those 2 weekdays that we'll be looking at, Monday and Tuesday, we're going to be looking at the book of, or the letter of James. So we're ending our whole history here, at least from the perspective of the first reading, of Solomon and David and Saul. And a tiny bit, we're going to look at a tiny bit, really tiny, just tiny bit of Rehoboam. And then we're going to continue, as I say, next week. So what are we learning today? Well, what happened was that Solomon, in his later years, turned away from the Lord. He had many wives, and then he turned away from the Lord because his wives, which were from other nations, and that was originally forbidden by God, turned his heart towards these other gods. And because of that, God turned his heart against Solomon, telling Solomon that he was going to end up causing rebellion in the kingdom. Because remember what David told him, just follow the rules, just follow what the Lord says, and everything will work out fine, and you'll always have a peaceful kingdom. But when Solomon turns away from the Lord raises, in that sense, the Lord raises this rebellion against Solomon. Now, when he turned away from the Lord, he also engaged in practices the Lord didn't want, and that included forced labor. That's the way it's written in as I looked in my research, the Revised Standard Version, Catholic edition. But what is another word for forced labor? Slavery. He to build his kingdom, just as we understand all the other kingdoms did, he had slaves come and create his great buildings in his city. Well, because of that, as we see here, the Lord is going to punish the house of David, which is Solomon, starting with his son, and they're going to be the rebellion. And this becomes the source of what ends up being the two kingdoms. Now, what our reading is today is a prophecy of what's going to happen with the two kingdoms, that all but one kingdom will remain, will actually leave the house of David, and this one kingdom will stay with the house of David, and that becomes the split between Israel and Judah. And Judah, of course, continues its existence, with the exception of the Babylonian exile, but essentially those 40 years, continues its existence right up until just after the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus. So Judah, David, let me get my names right. Jesus becomes the new King David, as we understand. And so the old promises of David now are ended. And so the kingdom that is promised to David and his lineage also ends with the Romans coming in 70 AD. So you see, all of this is going on. But remember, when you put yourself into the position of those who are watching this and those who are experiencing this in real time back in the day, you realize they had no idea what was coming. Just the same way you have no idea what's coming. Does that mean I know? No, it doesn't. We know what the Bible says, but we also understand a lot of that is symbolic language and a lot of that is prophetic language, meaning the Bible is teaching us some powerful truths. So we know what the Bible says. That's why, as I always like to point out, I don't get into those who will sit there and read the newspaper and then say, well, connects to Revelation 5:22 and this happened and that happened and all the other. No, don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. But what it does cause us to do is to realize that we can see the world as it is today, but we don't know what's coming, and remember the message of the Lord. If you follow the teachings of the Lord, this is what David told Solomon, you will live in a peaceful society. The reverse is also true. If you reject God, you will live in a rebellious society. Why? Because, remember, I learned this many years ago. What is the source of evil? I want my world my way. That's the source of evil. And so what do we recognize as the source of evil? I want my world my way. And what happens when we turn away from the Lord? We have a whole bunch of people saying, I want my world my way. And what kind of world do they create? It's a world that where each individual person wants their world their way turns into total chaos. And I love a description of chaos. What did God, this actually is from the movie Event Horizon. What did God bring into the world? Order. What existed before God brought creation into the world? Chaos. And what happens when we turn away from the Lord? Chaos. The other thing we look at is light and darkness. This is always a fascinating thing, and I've always talked about this, how Jesus uses light and darkness. God is light. And what happens if you're near a source of light? Where do you go? The source of light, and you turn around and you walk away from it. Where do you go? Into darkness. So that's where the principle is proving itself out, where David explains to Solomon, what you need to do is follow the precepts of the Lord, and you will have a peaceful kingdom. What does Solomon do? He ends up not doing that, and you have this chaos that ultimately leads to the division of the kingdoms, the loss of Israel completely, and then you have the one kingdom that remains up until the death, the resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. Actually, even more so, the descent of the Holy Spirit in the beginning of the gospel. So there you have that whole reality. And again, just as the people back then would not be able to understand that's what's happening, neither can we. Because all these things that are going on in our world are happening in our real time, but we don't know the fruit of them. And that's why it's important to go back and listen to the principles of Christ. Now, we want to be careful. See, this is one of the things I teach all the time, to be people of prayer. You want to be in contact with the Lord all the time. One of the great struggles we have in our church is this division between those who are caught up in these are the rules, you have to follow them, and they have no relationship with God whatsoever. You won't hear them talking about having this relationship with Christ. What you'll hear them talking about is rules, and you have to follow the rules. But you can't do that, because this is what the Gospels are all about. We are in union with Christ, so we follow Christ, and we seek to live the gospel in the way the Lord calls us. Now, I deal with this all the time. Many people find living the gospel to be intensely difficult. And there are those who say, well, it's supposed to be difficult. Actually, I would disagree, because Jesus himself said that. But that's why prayer comes into this, where you bring to the Lord and you ask the Lord to help you. Because here's the thing. This is the great division between Jesus and the Pharisees. The Pharisees were all the rules. That was it. And they believed in, following the text of the letter. Now, remember what Jesus says. No jot or tittle of the law will pass away. It always is there. Why? Because these are the principles of truth. But how we live those principles is something that we all deal with every day. And we need to have that relationship with God in order to properly live those principles, but also to remember what Jesus did. He humanized those principles. He made those principles human so that people could speak to the Lord. If you really want to think of something that happens, this is so real. You may have people who say, this is the way it's got to be, and you will do this, and rah, 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 rah. But when you confront them, and not even in a negative way, you just say, wait a minute, you're telling me to do X, Y, and Z, but wait a minute, you're telling me, and I'm finding that just doesn't work that way. You notice people soften because now they have to deal with you on a personal level and not on a level of, I've said the rules and this is what you will do. And that's an important distinction because that's what Jesus did. God comes among the people. God is with us. And now it's no longer, well, this is the rule and you better follow the rule. It is, no, you need to humanize the rule. And when Jesus gave that great, powerful teaching, and what was that powerful teaching? That the Sabbath was made for the man. Man was not made for the Sabbath. What does that mean? That the Sabbath was there to help man have this relationship with God. Sabbath is not something to which the man is to be enslaved because it happens to be the Sabbath. So we see this powerful distinction between the two, and we understand this distinction and this radical teaching that leads us to have this personal relationship with God. This is why prayer is so essential. That's the reason why I tell you what's the most important thing that I can do is to pray every day. What's the most dangerous thing I can do? Not pray every day. It's extremely dangerous, especially for a priest, not to pray every day. And it's extremely important. And this is where we bring in that humanity. This is where we bring in that reality of humanity, of the truth of Christ. We bring all of that in, that humanity that Jesus brings within his role where he becomes God with us. But when we just follow rules, when we just see rules, then the humanity is gone and you got the people say, this is the way it's supposed to be. And it's disastrous. Well, we go back to see that this is one of the things that you're going to witness, because when Solomon starts doing the forced labor and you have the division, the whole bit, well, where is all that going to go off the rails? When people start living these rules without that relationship with God. Remember, it's all about the relationship with God. We understand this powerfully because what is it that God said was an abomination to him? It was being faithful to the Sabbath, but not being faithful to treating other people humanly. So that's why you need to take care of the poor. That's why you need to take care of the oppressed and the widows and the orphans and everything else, because you are humanizing. You are acting as God's agent in treating people who need to be treated humanly, just as everyone else does, but who are most vulnerable to be treated inhumanly, and we're called to do that. But when we lose that sense, then people are treated inhumanly. And this is where, again, that whole aspect of understanding that great division between a relationship with Christ and just following the rules. And you got to be careful of that. You really have to be careful of that, because you will notice the people who are the most toughest, the most angry, the most stern in their faith are the people who just follow the rules and may not have this deep prayerful relationship. Fulton Sheen understood the rules, and he talked about the rules, and he enforced the rules, so to speak. But Fulton Sheen was also a deep person of prayer, and he was able to explain the rules in a way that would help people to understand the love and mercy of God. Those who don't do that can teach you the rules, but they can't teach you a human aspect of the rules. And that's why you'll have the people being, this is the way it should be, and this is very dangerous. And what makes it even worse, which I think is demonic, is you'll have these people, these priests, who run around claiming to be exorcists, and they may be exorcists. I'm not saying that they're not. And they'll start talking about the devil is here, the devil is there, and this is all the devil, and the devil is in mental illness, and the devil is in what is it called, bipolar disease, and the devil is in evolution, and devil is in this. That's very dangerous, because where's the power there? Power's in the devil. That's a lie. God is the ultimate power, and so you always be careful of people who are saying that. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. We really love the likes. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to comment, and also don't forget our phone number. You can call us up and tell us all about what you like or don't like about the show. We're going to be back right after this. In the meantime, remember, we are the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So we've been talking about that whole understanding of Solomon and Solomon going astray as we enter into Lent next week. And one of the things we want to do in Lent is like the church's own retreat. So what we want to do is look at the 3 things in Lent. First of all, one of the things we want to do in Lent is not follow rules. That's it. I mean, we want to follow rules, but we want to, this is the time we have to do this. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, no. You want to build into the spirit of Lent. So, for example, Wednesday is a day of fast and abstinence. And what does that mean? That means abstinence means you can't eat meat. So all on Fridays, you can't eat meat. Well, again, what does that mean? Just don't eat meat. So instead of having a pepperoni pizza, you can have a cheese pizza. I mean, and if you really take it from that perspective, then you may miss the point. Because why do you not eat meat? Well, you're being mindful of this is a special time. So make this a special time. And not just by not eating meat, but by calling this a special time and being mindful of who we are as disciples of Christ. So this is also a great time to look at maybe bad habits you might have had for a little while and to get rid of those bad habits. Or at least, don't get rid of everything all at once. Do everything day at a time. And maybe this is the year to get rid of your worst bad habit, if you can. And kind of look in that. And, I have a whole bunch of bad habits. Well, don't get rid of all of it at once. It's not going to work. Get rid of one. Kind of work on that. So maybe you have a habit of eating in between meals. And eating unhealthy stuff. Eating, candy bars all I don't know. I'm just giving this as an example. Well, don't eat in between meals during Lent, or eat healthy stuff in between meals, which would probably be the easier thing to do. So that's one of the things to do. And work on that to come up with a little habit. But also remember, this is where you want to focus on prayer time. So one of the things you want to do is good spiritual reading. Not just spiritual reading, good spiritual reading. Now, we've been talking all year with some of the authors from Ignatius Press. And although I don't necessarily agree with everything that is published in Ignatius Press, I will tell you that Ignatius Press, in my opinion, this is before they ever before their publicity wing ever contacted me. I consider them a gold standard of Catholic publishing, without question. Then there are other excellent Catholic, gold standard. Well, if it's all gold, then that says a lot. And a lot of Catholic publishers are all gold. Ave Maria Press, excellent. There's also some others. There's Pauline. We work with the Pauline sisters forever. PaulineStore.com. Excellent stuff. And they get into a lot of stuff for even for like children and young adults that you may want to look at, especially for maybe your family for Lent. There's things like that. They have graphic novels and stuff like that. So that's Pauline Sisters. So look at some good press. Now, some press. Catholic press I don't necessarily recommend, but they may have some titles that are pretty good, and then they may have others I'd say no, don't even go near that stuff. And it's usually that which is rooted in the stuff I won't recommend is stuff that's rooted in following the rules and being very strict, and this is the way it should be, and so I won't recommend that stuff. But good spiritual reading is important. And that's great. So, and we don't have as much of good spiritual reading in our church today on a magazine level as we used to because of the internet. But if you remember, there were some great publications still around. Catholic Digest is still around. But there was some great spirituality magazines that were rooted in the spiritual, prayerful tradition of the church. They're not so much common anymore, and all that. So do understand that there are some great publishers out there, and you may want to consider some of the publishing that is there. And it's fascinating. We want to look at that. We want to understand that. And when we realize that, so good spiritual reading, you can find the tactics are right the word, the style of Bible reading coming from Monsignor Jonas Abib. You can find that, you know what, I'm going to link to it. I'll put a link to it in the show today. You can find that there, and it's a series that I actually did. And if you check out the series, you will see that this is a pretty powerful understanding of how to read the Bible that I use every day, and it works all her deep reality into this powerful understanding of how to read the Bible and everything else. It's really great. And so we look at that as well. And then we understand this great, it's just great things that we can do to fully appreciate. Now, some other things you may do. One of the things I'd encourage you to do is to find actually something unusual. And by that I mean, find something. For example, one of the things I like to do during Lent is I like to engage in more reading and writing. And it's been interesting this time because my schedule changed, so I'm not able to read and write on the same schedules. And that's been something that's bothered me. So, and one of the things I always tell people, if you find out that, like, I went off someplace for the day, and you're looking for where I might be, say something you need to find me and stuff. Well, if you can find out where I am, like what town I'm in, look at libraries and bookstores, and that's where you find me always. And so that's one of the things. So one of the things I like to do for Lent is to do reading that I wouldn't normally do. Now, there's one book I always try to read every Lent, and I never get into it, and that's from Ernest Hemingway's, now the sun also rises, I think it is. I love his short stories. The Hint of an Explanation not that one. That was Graham Greene. A clean, well-lit place. That's the one I meant to say. I meant to say a clean, well-lit place, and out came The Hint of an Explanation. Interesting story, at least from my perspective. You might be bored stiff right now. But my perspective is this. My first short story, my second short story, was called Elysium. And of course, it's my second short story, so obviously it's a masterpiece. When you're starting writing, that's what you do. So it's my second short story. And I was living in California, and if you know anything about California, you can see Southern California, you see all LA and everything. Well, when you get east of that whole area, you enter into deserts. And when you get into places like Barstow or on your way to Barstow, you're going to go through these desert areas. So it took place in a bar located in the desert. So it's in the middle of nowhere, which, maybe there's a plot hole there. How do you run a run a bar in the middle of the desert? Which basically you actually can. I suppose you have to have a gas station there and everything. And the reason is because people have to stop for either something to eat or gas or whatever. So that's where it took place. And this guy was whatever. And the whole story. And I submitted it. And of course, it came back. And this guy wrote, he said, it wasn't too bad. But he said, why don't you look up A Clean, Well-Lit Place by Ernest Hemingway? And I did, and I've loved that story ever since. Another one is Hills Like White Elephants. Do you know that Ernest Hemingway wrote a pro-life story, and it's Hills Like White Elephants? Definitely check that out sometime. It's not really a pro-life story. You have to read it to understand what I'm saying. So I love some of Ernest Hemingway's writing. And I know others who absolutely despise Hemingway, but I really do. But then look at some other writers. And, one of my favorite books, my favorite book out of all books is The Great Gatsby. But if one of my favorite books is Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, which used to be required reading in California. And, so maybe instead of like saying, well, I'm going to give up, candy or something, replace it all and say, it's not I'm going to give up something. I'm going to do that because I'm going to do something else. And, find something like that. One example would be reading some classic literature. Another book I read when I was on a cruise was The Heart of Darkness, which I absolutely despised. I hated that book. I'm sorry. I really didn't like Joseph Conrad. We'll be right back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Going back to receive your high school diploma can make a huge difference in your life. Not just for you, but for your loved ones and your community as well. Across the country, thousands of free adult education centers are ready to help with teachers who will guide you every step of the way. Find free and supportive adult education centers near you at finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council. And the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudio.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. And so this is something to think about over the weekend as Lent approaches. And remember, one of the things I always teach is that Lent really, don't start your Lenten discipline completely until first Sunday of Lent. Because the 3 days of Ash Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are really days to kind of see how it's working. Because you can come up, well, this is what I'm going to try to do. And then you find out it's completely impractical. I'm going to give up drinking water. Well, obviously don't do that. I'm going to give up. I'm not going to drink anything. And then finally when they rush you to the emergency room on Friday, you go, well, maybe that isn't a good idea. You know what I'm saying? But kind of, you need to tweak it a bit. And then first Sunday of Lent, see how you, and then if you need to tweak it all the way through Lent, feel free. But come up with something that's going to deepen your faith. And again, and that might mean getting more involved in culture. Maybe think of seeing decent movies that you've always wanted to see, or maybe getting involved in some kind of activity that you always wanted to get involved in. Maybe, kind of helping the homeless, or just walking down the street and talking to people if it's doable, depending on where you are. You have to know what you're doing. I'm one of those people, if they say, don't go there, I'll be there. So I'm not going to recommend you to do the same thing I do, because, that's exactly the way I am. Don't do that. Don't walk down that neighborhood. I'll be there tonight. Okay, we'll be back on Monday. Have a blessed weekend. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.